Hello everybody, this is Count VHS and welcome back to another Wainriders update. This is a series of videos where we are looking at progress for the upcoming mod Total War Wainriders. This is a mod set in the 19th century of the Third Age of Middle-earth, so about 1,000 years before the War of the Ring. This is being developed for the original Rome Total War, not the remaster, and it uses the Alexander EXE. Now, I know some people occasionally leave comments on these videos about, well, you know, too bad it's not using the remaster, I can't play it. That's not so. If you're using the remaster, I'm quite sure you also have the original version of the game as part of that. So what we'll do at some point is, you know, certainly when we get to release, we'll have some instructions here for how to access it. But anyway, there's reasons why we're using the original as opposed to the remaster. We'll maybe get into those at some point. If you're curious, leave a question in the comments, and I'll answer that as best I can. But today we're going to take a look at the area of Rhovanion. So this is roughly the region between the forests of Mirkwood, with you know, the River Kelduin bordering it in the north, and eastward towards the Sea of Rune. Although there is a bit of a sort of different cultural zone in the area of Rhovanion, here just northwest of the Sea of Rune, and taking as its rough southern border the arid Lithwy, the Ash Mountains of Mordor, and of course extending west, you know, through the Brownlands and towards the Anduin. So this is the regional area of Rhovanion as we're conceiving it here. Of course, in the Lord of the Rings and the maps, Tolkien uses the word Rhovanion for a much broader area, and so it is, you know, it's something you could argue extends from maybe the Misty Mountains, maybe the Great River, eastward to some vague point, right? It basically means Wilderland. But for the purposes of this mod, because it is set focusing on the Wainrider wars between Gondor and the Wainriders, but of course it encompasses other things in Middle-earth. The word Rhovanion seems to be more narrowly focused in this period to cover the area that I just described. That is because when we read about the Wainriders attacking in you know, 1851 through 1856 and developing their dominion here, they are later called throughout the text the Appendix A, as well as the text Cirion and Eorl in Unfinished Tales. These Wainriders, this group of Wainriders, is referred to as the Wainriders of Rhovanion, and this is their area. And we can tell from various, you know, clues in the text that this is the area that they seem to have controlled. What I want to talk about today with regard to how the mod is coming is sort of how we might imagine the blending or the maybe continuity of settlement in this particular area. For most of you who are familiar with the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, you may know that, you know, centuries before this period, there is a very famous king, potentially, or prince, perhaps, in Rhovanion, known as Vidugavia. This is a sort of a Latinized form of a Gothic word meaning, I believe, wood dweller or forest dweller. And indeed, it mentions in the Appendix A that his territory was mostly in the eastern eaves of the southern part of Mirkwood, right around here. And there's a note, I think it's in Cirion and Eorl, that the East Bight, which is this sort of indentation in the forest, was largely created by the Northmen's cutting of trees. So we've assumed that this is essentially the heartland of the Northmen in Rhovanion, or had been, you know, for several centuries. They certainly would have had you know, herds, lots of you know, grassland and open terrain for horses and any other kind of livestock they may have you know, been raising. But it seems like they dwelt mostly around the eaves of the forest. So when we read that the Wainriders swept in and conquered Rhovanion, they must have taken over these settlements, right? And so that's why there is a settlement up here called Rhovanost. If you are familiar with 4th Age Total War, which is made by the same modding team as is working on Wainriders, you may remember that Rhovanost was somewhere down here, actually, in that mod. But I think it does make some good sense to have it up here, in the sense that this is sort of viewed as kind of a center of Northmen settlement. The capital of the Wainriders, however, the capital of the Western Horde, as we are calling this faction, the Wainriders of Rhovanion, we're calling them the Western Horde. The capital is currently set is the settlement here of Rhovanion, which is roughly centered on their territory that they begin with. If you play as the Western Horde, you will start with 5 settlements, I believe. We've got 2 down here, Nathras, Beren, Lotharen, in this broad area over here. And then, yes, we've got Yathin Ra, Raunmund, and Rhovanost, with opportunities to expand to the north. As you can tell, there are some rebels in northern Rhovanion and in the eastern Mirkwood Eaves, and then over in Dorwinion as well. To your south, you've also got some rebel territory, southern Rhovanion, as well as some allies to your south and east in the form of the other Wainrider faction, Great Rune. Now, the reason I want to talk about Northmen continuity here is because if you are familiar with 4th Age Total War, as I imagine most of my viewers are, all of this may look very familiar to you, right? This particular part of the map being occupied by a single faction, even the colors, and even the banner, the symbol of the horse that we've taken for sort of the heraldry of this particular faction. All this may seem like there is a great deal of continuity. And playing 4th Age Total War, you may get the impression that the faction, the Kingdom of Rhovanion, which in that mod is a Northmen faction, has always been there to some extent, right? The mod 4th Age Total War may give the impression that there were always Northmen living in this zone and to some extent in control of this zone. Well, there may have been Northmen always living in this zone throughout the later years of the Third Age and into the Fourth Age, but if they were, their numbers would have been really severely curtailed, and I would suggest that they would have been almost entirely swept up and acculturated into the Easterlings who settled here. Because the thing that we find through reading sort of in chronological sequence, everything that we know about this part of the world is that ever since the Wainriders invaded in 1851 through 1856 and conquered this territory, Northmen were never able to take it back. We know that there was an attempted rebellion in 1899 where the Northmen who were kicked out of this area were settled in the Anduin Vales on the western side of the forest. They sent some outlaws and rebels, rabble-rousers into the east through the woods to, set fire to the Wains and the fortified camps that the Wainriders had set up. So again, this is about, 40 or so years on from the initial invasion, and they're attempting to retake this territory. And even with the assistance of Gondor and the winning of a victory to the south and west of the Wainriders' new territory, this rebellion was not possible or did not have the intended effect. So the Northmen returned to their homes alongside the Anduin and never again, we are told, were able to take this territory back. And we find, that seems to be the case throughout. We never hear of Northmen resettling, either from the Woodmen, the Aotheod, or the Men of Dale. We know that some Northmen did escape across the river to the north, either during the Wainrider period or much later during the invasions of the Balkoth in the, around 2000 to 2500 or so. And the Balkoth seem to have drifted into this region to sort of augment by that point, native Easterlings who had been living here for centuries. We don't hear of any conquest of this area by the Balkoth, so it seems to just be more immigration from the east, reaching a critical mass and then pushing across the Anduin with a large, but it seems to be a rather crude force of attackers. Nevertheless, that crude force is able to, with assistance from orcs, overwhelm the forces of Gondor, and it's only the timely arrival of Eorl and the Aotheod from the north that's able to end that thread. But even after Eorl's day, when his Northmen, settle Kalanarthon and it becomes Rohan, they do not push east across the Anduin. They do not resettle this area. Eorl himself is killed in a later battle with Easterlings. So it's interesting that this area essentially drops off of the map with regard to the Northmen and with regard to Gondor. That is not to say, though, that there are no Northmen living in here. And so one of the things that we have tried to emphasize in the mod is the variety of Northmen, let's say, cultural expression. So in other words, you will encounter in the Wainriders mod several factions that are ruled by Northmen. We've got the Eotheod, of course, is probably the main one, although probably with a very tricky and difficult start. And then you have the League of the North, which is actually a dwarven faction, but does have a strong Northman presence. But within the Wainrider faction particularly, it'll be most obvious to you when you're playing the Western Horde, there will be a very strong Northman contingent. This is something I have talked about earlier, so if you are more curious about the particular military makeup of the Western Horde, or really any other faction, you can go and look for those videos here on the channel. And so today I want to talk about some of those units, but the map is up here just for context. I also want to point out, some of the comments I've received on some of the earlier videos pointed out the settlement work, and that is the work of Valor, I believe. I don't know if Webba did work on these. I know he's done settlement work with regard to the battle maps, certainly in 4th Age, and campaign work for settlements as well. But I think these were mostly Valor. Certainly let me know if I've gotten that wrong. So, and another sort of thing, that what you're seeing here is to some extent work in progress, in the sense that all the resources are currently just grouped around the settlements to make it easier for us to, at a glance, see what's where. When the mod is getting closer to release, we're going to move these in a more aesthetically pleasing area around the map, but they're just here now for convenience sake. So you've got settlements as the Western Horde that are looking essentially like Northmen's settlements. You can see that there's walls, there's little clusters of houses in some cases, going out from the walls. Your smaller settlements here have no walls, it's just a little cluster of huts essentially. And so the Western Horde does take after the Northmen in the settlements that they own currently. But let's now take a look at the units, because Webba has been doing more work on some of the units for the mod, and as I mentioned in a previous video, the work he's doing now is not so much on the factional units, but it is on the units that can be trained sort of in a levy capacity in certain regions that one faction may conquer, or that units that may appear as rebels. So we'll take a look at those here. Now these units are, he wanted me to be clear, these are work in progress units. We are looking at them in this sort of visual way because they're not implemented into the mod yet, but I thought it nevertheless might be fun to look at them. And also, you get a better vision of them, honestly, than if I were to sort of pull up the game and get close in. This gives you sort of a better sense, I think, a better visual sense of how they will look. These units, I mean, he says they're work in progress. I think they look fantastic, but I think they're work in progress in the sense of, there may be a few other passes for certain quality issues, I guess, but also, maybe things like, naming or how they're going to be recruited. So I will speak rather vaguely about the specifics of some of these units and where they may be found, and that is, understand me, that is 100% for mystery, to retain this sort of mystery for the mod, and completely not because I don't have all that information in my head memorized. But nevertheless, I will probably make mistakes here anyway in terms of how these units are going to appear. But this is a Sworn Champions unit. So this is one you may remember from previous videos. They've gotten a spear in this update, which I think is very cool. So these are going to be, they look to me to be a strictly melee kind of unit. And, I just love the male veil here. This is an example of a unit with a strong, indeed entirely sort of Northman heritage, but this is a version of this unit for the faction of Great Rune. This is, you can tell by the symbol here, this is the Eastern Wainrider faction that starts off into the east. And so this is a unit that I believe is not going to be initially available to Great Rune. This is one that they can access in Rhovanion only. So once they acquire some of that Northman territory, then they can start bringing these guys into their ranks. Here is how the unit is going to look when it is recruited by the Western Horde. And so these guys are going to have a sort of easier time accessing this version of their unit roster, I guess, because the population is going to be there from the outset. We've also got another few Rhovanion themed units. These are all Northmen again, available to the Wainriders. So the Sworn Lancers here. This is a Great Rune version. There is also a Western Horde version of this, but that's been implemented in the mod for years now. So this is just this is the updated sort of texture for Great Rune. So once again, if you are playing as Great Rune, or if you're playing as the Western Horde in Rhovanion, you'll be able to train these Sworn Lancers. This is a cavalry unit. They've got a spear, but also a sword as a secondary weapon. And you can definitely see that these are Northmen who have joined up to fight. The way I'm sort of thinking about these units, as well as the champions, is that these are among the elites, right? These are maybe the nobility of the Northmen who either were threatened to join up, or maybe it seems to me more likely that they willingly joined up with the Easterlings when they invaded. We have evidence for that very thing occurring centuries before the Wainrider invasion. If you read Appendix A, you can see that one of the great impetuses for Minalcar's invasion of, I think it's 1346. He is I think either the regent of Gondor at that point or a steward, and he is tasked, or he takes it upon himself, to invade east, essentially from the Brown Lands, right, to get into Rhovanion and go farther, because it has come to his attention that Northmen who were sort of settled in that area of what we're calling Rhovanion, Northmen who were settled there had taken up arms with Easterling invaders at various points. Sometimes they had done this just to, make a name for themselves, to settle feuds between their own princes, right? So you can easily imagine this very interesting political situation with not one solid block of Northmen existing in Rhovanion, but multiple groups with different leaders, all sort of jostling for power, for honor, maybe for wealth, and that leading to a lot of problems. So when some Easterlings show up over the hill, over the horizon, with a lot of warriors looking to raid, you can imagine that if there's a feud going on, one Northman prince is going to be all too eager to take up an offer of assistance and lead those Easterlings right to his Northmen rivals. And so this is a way in which you can imagine the Northmen joining up, not only to fight amongst themselves on the side of Easterlings, but also to fight against Gondor, because that territory had been, essentially settled as a bulwark for Gondor in the relatively early years of its expansion. Now, again, all of that information is from, about 500 years prior to the Wainrider period, but I see no reason why that couldn't have happened again. So the idea that there was some total Northmen genocide, to me, seems unlikely. We definitely hear, Tolkien says in Appendix A, that Eastern and Southern Rhovanion were enslaved, and so we can take that to mean various different things. But he doesn't necessarily say particularly what happens to those other portions of the area. And so, at any rate, I think we can easily justify this willing joining of Northmen alongside Easterlings. So we've also got some of the lower tier stuff as well. Tribute Hunters. This is a skirmish unit. I believe this is also going to be the Great Rune texture, and you can tell by the sort of absence of any heraldry on the shield that this is a lower tier kind of levy unit. One of the things that Webba has mentioned is that the logic for designs in terms of shields is that if it's a levy unit, typically the shield will be essentially blank. It's going to have the colors of the faction, but it's not going to have a lot else. These are the low tier guys. Here, take a shield, get out into the battle. I think these guys are available at tier 1 or maybe tier 2, but very low tier stuff. Just the same thing with the tribute spears. Again, these are both Northmen units. This is just a simple spear unit, essentially, equivalent to a tier 1 militia type. And this is a skirmish unit with, obviously javelins for throwing. I believe also a spear as its main melee weapon. But these guys don't have any insignia necessarily. However, you will see fancier shields and designs on rebel units. So we can see that this is a Shields of Rhovanion rebel version. Now, the Shields of Rhovanion are a unit that is available to the Aotheod faction, but also in Rhovanion, there may be rebellions, and some of those rebellions may take the form of some of these higher tier units. So I just love the look of this one. So you've got obviously a javelin, maybe just a few javelins to throw, as well as a spear. This is a cavalry unit. Actually, I'm not sure if this is a cavalry unit. I think this is an infantry unit. I could be wrong there. But Aotheod does have some cavalry units as well as infantry units that operate in this way. I'm just getting mixed up as to which is which. So this, as you can tell, this is an intricate design. This is a more elite style unit with all the mail and all the metal, of course. And so they're going to have shields. So the Rebels, Rebel wanted to introduce a bit of visual variety amongst the Rebel units, even though they're not, directly controllable by the player, that they should still be somewhat visually interesting. And I think that's really a hallmark of what Wainriders is trying to do. In addition to the visual interest in Rebels, one of our big goals is to represent some of these smaller population elements that are often, ignored or just not thought about very much, that must have existed in some way in the lore, or at least we think it's reasonable that they did. So anyway, Shields of Rhovanion, very cool units. And then this is a Rhovanion Nobles. Yes, this is a Rhovanion Nobles. This is the Rebel version. This is, I believe, the bodyguard for Rhovanion, or maybe actually it might be like one tier down from that. So this is whichever way you slice it, this is a high tier cavalry unit. Again, we've got spear and javelin. And again, this is a Rebel unit, but it's got a lot of intricate colors on the shield. So if you're playing as the Western Horde and you don't manage your settlements very well, or if you happen to invade a nearby settlement that's already owned by rebels, you may run into these guys. So I just love the look for this. So I hope you enjoyed this look. I've got a lot more of this type of thing to show. Let me know if you'd like to see more of this. Because Weba has been providing us in the developers Discord with this sort of updates on his progress for the past couple of months, and he has been putting out an incredible amount of work. So I've got kind of a nice little backlog I can show you, and we can talk about how these units might fit into the world and how you might see them, and a bit about the lore as well. So until the next one, everybody, take care.